We're counting down from 6 to 1 to expose the 6 limpest Liberal leaders, what they've done, what they've said, and why they're more spineless than a jellyfish. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show. If there's one thing the other side hates is watching this channel grow. So could I please ask you that if you are new here that you do hit the subscribe button, and if you are a returning viewer, can you please make sure you hit the notification bell to make sure that you always get told when there's a new episode happening. So today we're going to have a bit of fun. We're counting down 6 to 1, the most spineless, lamest, pathetic, weakest Liberal leaders in the country. Coming in at number 6 is Vincent, Tazia, the South Australian Liberal leader who shat the bed when the Liberals lost the black by-election shortly after Ben Hood's live births bill in the Parliament last year. So just quick recap, Ben Hood, a Liberal MP, introduced a private members bill that would have banned third trimester abortion, but it would have allowed the babies to be induced alive. So a woman could still terminate a pregnancy, but she delivers a baby that's alive rather than dead, and then that baby gets placed for adoption if she doesn't want to raise that child. It seemed like a incredible bill that was a compromise, a win-win for everybody, but it lost tragically by 1 vote. Now, when this happened, of course, the pro-abortion left-wing media jumps on all of it. In fact, they were jumping on it the entire way through. But after that happened, after we lost by 1 vote, all eyes are on Tazia, and he's being asked a lot of questions, and I have some sympathy for that. It's hard being a political leader in this country from the Liberal Party, from the Conservatives, facing a left-wing pro-abortion media establishment. That is not an easy place to be, but you are in politics, so you got to expect it, Vincent. And when Vincent gets hounded by the ABC, because who else but better than to hound pro-life MPs than the ABC? And that's the really sad thing about this. Vincent Tazia, I think, is actually someone who, up until this point, we've thought of as a pro-life MP. He voted against abortion up to birth. He actually voted against the entire bill in 2021. And yet here, and this is why he makes number 6 on our list, Vincent Tazia says, I'll make it really clear. If anyone makes a private members bill like that moving forward, they certainly won't be welcome in the shadow cabinet or in the cabinet. So once again, it's like this faux display of strength that we're going to see from all of these Liberals all the way through. But it's this, I'm the strong man, I'm clamping down on my party and I'm saying enough is enough, we are going to be united and we're not going to talk about abortion. This is the playbook from these faux strong Liberals. And Tazia basically throws Ben Hood under the bus, which later on, when he's pressed on that by another pesky journalist, he tries to weasel out of. Let's watch.
This meeting?
No, Ben's a very well-valued member of the team, and he, like anyone in the team, is willing to contribute and have their say. But no, this is part of what we do after any by-election. We make sure we get together and we'll get on and move on from this by-election and make sure that we continue.
You fired a warning shot aimed at him this morning.
I wouldn't say it's a warning shot at all. I think we've learnt in the past that some of these social conscience issues, when they are prosecuted, they can be a little bit of a distraction for the party, and we're keen to move on fast.
So how pathetic is that? He can't even own it. Earlier that morning, he fronts the press and says, you cannot be on my front bench if you raise the topic of abortion, if you bring a private members bill. And then later that afternoon, when questioned on this by a journalist, a pretty reasonable question, aren't you throwing Ben Hood under the bus because he just introduced this abortion bill? And you're basically saying, Ben, you can't be on the front bench if you introduce a bill like that in the future. And Tazia's like, no, I wouldn't say that. And you see this with these limp Liberals. They have no conviction. They have no ability to show any leadership. I mean, the black by-election, that had nothing to do with Ben Hood's abortion bill. It did have something to do with the way the Liberal Party managed that bill. So the vast majority of the Liberal membership and the Parliament in South Australia is pro-life in the upper house. And you've got this one really aggressively, rabidly pro-abortion MP, Michelle Lenzik, and a couple of remaining lefty Liberals, like they're called the moderates. And they were honestly foaming at the mouth when Ben Hood introduced this bill. And the first they heard about it was because, when you introduce a private members bill in your party, you have to circulate a briefing paper and circulate the bill. And so that wasn't publicly available. But get this, the crazy, psychotic left-wing Liberals who really should be in the Greens in Ben Hood's and Tazia's own party, they leaked it to the other side. They gave the briefing paper and the bill to Labor, and Labor had a field day on Twitter and with the pro-abortion media, releasing it before it was actually meant to be introduced on the Wednesday a few days later. So, Vincent Tazia, if he was really a leader, he would be addressing that. He would be addressing the dangerous leaks, the sabotaging of good Liberal MPs by this embittered, crazy, psychotic minority. And there would be consequences for those people for doing what they do. And yet that's not the takeaway for Vincent Tazia. He's allowed himself to be baited by the left-wing press to say we're just shutting down the conversation on abortion. Coming in at number 5 is none other than Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. So quick recap on him. He was originally in the Labor Party, switched to the Liberal Party because he probably realised that he was never going to be Prime Minister via Labor because of the faction system. And let's face it, Turnbull's not a union man and he's just not going to play that game. I mean, look at Andrew Charlton. He's a very similar Turnbull-like figure who's really trying to make it work in the Labor Party, but just unfortunately can't quite get to, the position of Treasurer or Prime Minister where he really thinks he deserves to be. And so Turnbull, pretty smart guy, switched to the Liberals, but always really should have been in the Greens or Labor. And as a Liberal Prime Minister, he was on the left-wing agenda on everything, on climate change, on abortion. Let's take a look.
Mr. Prime Minister, 27 babies aged 5 months gestation or more survived late-term abortions in Queensland hospitals last year, and this is the highest number of survivals following attempted terminations in 10 years. But each of these 27 babies were not rendered care and allowed to die. As a medical student who has seen many deliveries and loving care of premature babies, nothing is quite so horrifying as letting a baby perish in a clinic. Is it not the federal government's onus to protect all citizens, especially those who cannot speak for themselves?
Ashley, can you explain the circumstances you're talking about a little further? Of course, if you were talking about the law that protects any citizen and any person, regardless of their age, from physical harm, that is the responsibility of government. I mean, the criminal law in Queensland is obviously enacted by the Queensland Parliament.
Let's go back. I was just talking about late-term abortions here.
Yeah. So all of these babies were more than 5 months old already, and once they were born, there was no protection rendered for them. They were just left to perish. So what will your government do for situations such as these?
Well, this is an area that is very much. The answer, Ashley, is that this is very much an area within the jurisdiction of the state government, and I'm not passing the buck there, but it is. That's the fact. I'm not familiar with the precise terms of the law in Queensland relating to abortion, late term or otherwise, but it's very much a matter within the jurisdiction of the Queensland Parliament.
Now, you've rarely been asked about your Roman Catholic beliefs, but does any of this conflict with your religious beliefs? Well,
what Ashley describes is shocking cases, but you've asked me as the Prime Minister and the leader of the federal government what we can do about that. But it is again, I don't know enough about the circumstances, but the law that relates to abortion is very much within the jurisdiction of your Parliament here in Queensland.
So this is a Prime Minister who gets asked a question on live TV about the fact that babies survive their abortion and what should be done about it. And you can see he's visibly shocked. He doesn't seem to know about that. Maybe it is a new thing. In fact, a lot of Australians don't realise that babies survive abortions. In fact, in Australia, in just Queensland and Victoria, it's one baby a week who is surviving their abortion and is left in a state where there isn't a legislative right to care. And you've got to admire this questioner, this medical student who bravely takes on the Prime Minister and puts the data in front of him. But what you have to absolutely deplore, if we admire the questioner, the thing that we have to really say is just so weak and pathetic is that Turnbull can't even react as a human being. He hears about newborn babies who survive their abortion and are delivered alive and then left to die, and he can't even react as a person, as a father, because he's had children and presumably been there at their delivery. He knows what a newborn baby is like, and he can't even just say, look, that's disgusting, that shouldn't happen. And he then he switches to abortion, right, and how he supports abortion. And he then says this is a state's issue, and he just handballs it, when in reality, if you have a grave injustice like babies who are surviving their abortion and being left to die, that's a human rights issue that affects the entire country. It's not a states' rights issue. And there's many ways that the federal government could tackle it. You know, they could make it conditional upon health funding, that you don't get hospital funding unless you provide care for all babies who are born in that state, irrespective of the circumstances of their birth. They could also introduce a federal law that overrides states' law using the external affairs power, like Matt Canavan and Alex Antick's bill, which says that if a baby survives their abortion, they're allowed to be treated, or they should be treated no differently to any other baby. So there are lots of things the federal government can do, but probably the biggest takeaway here is Turnbull's failure to just speak up for these babies, to be so worried about, you know, his leadership, his political career, the optics on the pro-abortion ABC, and to just not respond as a person. Coming in at number 3 is another former Liberal leader, and that's Peter Dutton. Let's listen.
Party room, you told people not to basically make abortion a national issue, and I was curious, what is your personal view on abortion?
Well, my view is that I live in the state of Queensland, and I have a law in Queensland. It's similar to some other states. It's different to other jurisdictions, and I don't propose to advocate for
do you
a
support
change
abortion?
in that law. Of course I do, and I support a woman's right to choose. And I've been in very difficult circumstances where, as you know, a detective working in the sex offender squad, I've dealt with women who have been raped. I've dealt with women in domestic relationships who have been raped. It's a very, very difficult situation, and ultimately that's a choice and a decision for that individual to make, and that's the position I support.
And that's the moment Peter Dutton, in my view, lost the last election. It was an interview on ABC with Patricia Karvelis, and he's asked the question about abortion, and he completely sells his soul in order for some phantom ambition that he's somehow going to make it to the lodge. What he should have said is, what he's always said, is I'm against late-term abortion. I think there's no reason for late-term abortion. It's entirely medically unnecessary ever for the woman's health to have a late-term abortion. He could have said that, because that's actually what he said in 2019 when he was asked about this on TV. He said, I don't think New South Wales should be introducing abortion up to birth. And he didn't have to say I'm against abortion from conception, because maybe that's not really what's in his heart. But given that he was on the record as saying he was against abortion, late-term abortion, which is actually something that 99% of Australians would probably agree with Peter Dutton about, the fact that that's what he actually believes, and then the moment that he's got his eyes on the lodge and he's got this potential to actually be Prime Minister, and then he's in the hot seat on ABC radio, which is something he should expect, that this is a question they're going to throw at him. Instead, he says, I support a woman's right to choose, and then he starts banging on about rape. And the reality is, there's 88,000 abortions every year in Australia, and less than 1% of those are about rape. And so for Peter Dutton to turn this entire conversation about abortion to virtue signal to the left-wing media that he's just so on the side of women because, you know, he used to be a police officer and he used to protect women who were victims of sexual assault. Oh, it's just disgusting. Like, it really makes your blood boil to think about this man who very nearly made it into the lodge. And this was the moment, in my view, where ordinary Australians like you and me, we just saw through him. Like, everybody knows what the ABC is playing at here. We know that they're trying to get their gotcha moment with him on abortion, and they're going to try and use it to create those headlines about how he's anti-woman, anti-choice. And instead of actually having the balls to say what he really thinks, he just says what he thinks they want to hear, just so he can move on. And here's the thing, you know, if there's any prospective Liberal leaders watching this channel, you'd be wise to take note, because it's not like we the people just want you to parrot our beliefs back at us as if you believe them. No, we actually just want you to tell us what you actually think. So, you know, if Peter Dutton was against abortion up to birth in 2019, we would expect that when he was asked this question in 2024 by an ABC journalist, he would at least speak to that nuance. And even if there are people who would disagree with that opinion, which there's going to be, let's face it, like, this is one of the most controversial issues. So no matter what Dutton says in answering that question, he's going to offend someone. But we would respect him for actually having the gumption to say what he thinks and standing by it. I mean, you can respect someone who you disagree with with who stands up for what they believe. The left does this all the time. They don't, sugarcoat or like walk it back or just get really stage fright when asked the question. They stand by their principles and they speak them out assertively. And I think that is the difference here. And they lie all the time and their principles are pretty evil, but at least they stand by them. Coming in at number 3, and the only woman to make the list, is former Liberal leader Libby Mettam. And let's just note that actually a lot of these guys are former Liberal leaders, because I don't think it is a good strategy for survival and electoral success when you are as spineless as a jellyfish. Let's watch what Libby Mettam said.
Mandating the reporting of live births following an abortion to the coroner introduces an unnecessary intrusion into these lives, potentially compounding the emotional burden they already bear. It is our duty to ensure that the experiences of patients and their families are met with understanding and empathy, rather than subjecting them to additional stresses.
So not only is Libby Mettam at this point voting for abortion up to birth and for any reason, this is 2023 in WA, but she's also saying that when a baby survives their abortion, because it would just be like too difficult on the families, because we need to have empathy for them and the emotional burden they bear, we should just cover up the plight of newborns who survive their abortion and not mandate a referral to the coroner. I mean, that is just mind-blowing. That she gives that speech. Even the Labor MP, Amber Jade Sanderson, who's so aggressively pro-abortion that she brought this bill in the first place, she doesn't get up and try to justify this part of the bill. Labor's just trying to get it through without anybody really noticing. But Libby Mettam gets up and tries to justify the fact that actually the best thing that could happen in this situation when a baby survives their abortion is to just sweep it under the rug and cover it up. That we don't actually review what happened, what care that baby received, how long they lived for, why they lived, and what happened to them. She would just rather that nobody found out about it. Coming in at number 2 is none other than our friend Mark Speakman. I know we've seen this clip quite a few times, but it never gets old. Let's watch.
Dr. Joanna Howe emailed me last night. She wrote, quote, "Should Premier Minns vote for the bill and enable its passage, I will be leading a 20-month campaign across 5 marginal seats that are currently Labor-held but are also in socially conservative electorates," unquote. But then, to my shock, she then threatened, quote, "However, if you choose to vote for the bill, I will be left with no other choice but to suspend my planned campaign against Labor in order to lead a public campaign aimed at encouraging a grassroots opposition to you as Liberal leader," unquote. I won't cave in to brazen bullying like this.
The fact that Mark Speakman feels like he's being bullied by me, this 5-foot diminutive young woman with 5 kids from Adelaide, is enough to put Mark Speakman in the spineless coward category. And maybe Mark feels that this video is actually adding further to his trauma and it's compounding the bullying that he's experiencing. But let's just take a look at some of those things that he says. So he says, "To my shock," she said she was going to start campaigning against me. I mean, when I think of the word shock, I'm thinking of, I get pretty shocked if I see, if I saw someone running down the main street of Adelaide naked, I'd be shocked. Or if, if someone came up to me with at gunpoint or a knife and said, "Give me all your money," I'd be shocked. But if I was an elected political representative, in fact, the Liberal leader, and someone said to me, a member of the public said, "I'm going to run a political campaign against you unless you vote the way I want you to vote," I guess I just wouldn't be shocked by that, because I would just think that's the democratic process. Some of you guys have been pointing out the way he says the word "you" in this. He really emphasises that to his shock and horror. Dr. Joanna Howe is turning the campaign that was aimed at Chris Minns to you.
To you?
The way that he says it, guys, you have to go back and watch it if you didn't notice it. And, all of this is just a side point, really, because the real reason he is the second limpest Liberal in the country is because, and I guess you're wondering who's making number 1 when you've had this lineup already, but the real reason is because when it came down to it, he sided with the radical left in Labor and the Greens in pursuing an aggressive ideological pro-abortion agenda. And taking out the honours as the limpest Liberal in the country is none other than Queensland Premier David Crisafulli. Let's watch.
And I say to those young women, today the scare campaign ends. Yeah. No bill or amendment seeking to amend the Termination of Pregnancy Act 2018 is allowed to be introduced. I said there will be no changes. And despite that, Labor knew this, and despite that, the social media tsunami, the grubby phone calls continued unabated. They spent millions of dollars on a disgraceful scare campaign. This was never about the issue. It was US style, it was grubby. Labor didn't care about a woman's right to choose. It was all about Labor's desperate right to rule.
There's so many pathetic things about this, which we're going to unpack, but the big reason why this is the most cowardly act ever seen by a Liberal leader in this country is because he makes this big faux display of strength. Today the scare campaign ends, he says, and he really is injecting so much passion, more passion than I've ever seen David Crisafulli use, in fact. You can see that he's feeling personally offended by this scare campaign and how much it's bruised him. And so he says, today the scare campaign ends, and he's saying, I'm the strong guy. But what he's really doing is just capitulating completely to this scare campaign, to what Labor actually wants, which is for no reform on abortion at all. That is Labor's agenda. The pro-abortion unions that were pushing this campaign during the election, that is actually what their agenda was. They wanted to hurt Crisafulli and they wanted no change to Queensland's abortion laws. And this is the moment where David Crisafulli just gives it all to them and says, yep, for the next 4 years of my rule and reign as the Premier of this state, nobody can even bring abortion into this parliament. You can't raise it, you can't bring a bill. It's just banned. He's acting like he's speaking with so much courage, but who's he actually defending? He's just speaking for himself. This is all about him and his ego. Let's look at what that scare campaign was actually about. It was attacking him. And so why is he speaking with so much passion and fervour to defend himself? I mean, we don't really care about you. Think about something else. Think about other people. Think about the babies. The fact that Queensland is the abortion capital of Australia, that late-term abortion, the number of babies brutally killed in just the last 3 years has doubled in Queensland. Think about the fact that in Queensland, just a few months before he gave this speech, Louise Adset sat in the parliament and broke down in tears about babies surviving their abortions in their hospitals and being left to die on metal kidney dishes and in plastic witches' hats. A little baby she spoke of who survived for 5 hours breathing and wriggling and struggling to breathe. And here's David Crisafulli doing this big performance about, how he was offended and how he is now banning abortion. I mean, it's just so gross. And, from Tazia to Turnbull to Dutton to Mettam to Speakman and to Crisafulli, all of them just epitomise how pathetic and limp and spineless the Liberal Party's leadership is today. And how if the Liberals ever want to actually become a powerful force in this country, they have to turn away from being as left as the Labor Party and the Greens, but to actually stand for conservative values. And so let's finish with the words of Lucy Zellick in this opinion piece. And before I get to what I really want to talk about, I just want to tell you what she says about Speakman. She says, in New South Wales, it's clear that my 6-year-old has more of a spine than this Lib leader, who is nowhere to be found when it matters and is more vanilla than a tub of Peter's ice cream. And she said that days after he sided with the left on the abortion bill. But the thing that she makes the point in this article is about Italy's Conservative Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who actually stands for something. And let's see what she said when she addressed the CPAC conference in February. She says, despite all the mud they throw at us, citizens keep voting for us. They vote for us because we defend freedom. We love our nation. We want secure borders. We preserve businesses and citizens from the green leftist insanity. We defend family life. We fight wokeism. We protect our sacred right to our faith and our free speech, and we stand for common sense. It's no wonder that Giorgia Meloni is soaring in those opinion polls and is loved by the people. And these limp Liberals, they're going to be consigned to the dustbin of history and no one's going to remember them. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show.